We hope that you enjoy our very last session of the day and of the Invention Con with Meet the New Trailblazers, moderated by our very own USPTO Director of Education, Joyce Ward. Joyce, are you ready?
I am. Thank you, Jenny, so much.
Have fun. I can't wait for this one.
Same here. I'm super excited. As Jenny indicated, my name is Joyce Ward. I have the honor of serving as the Director of the Office of Education at the USPTO. I am wearing a vibrant red shirt. I am a Black African-American female with salt and pepper hair pulled up in a Ida B. Wells type sweep. I have on glasses. And I'm super excited. So I have a huge smile on my face. And I am going to ask each one of our panelists to introduce themselves. And I am going to go in alphabetical order. So that means I will be starting with Adele.
Hi, I'm Adele. I'm a 16-year-old senior at Westlake High School, and I'm super excited for this panel.
Wonderful. Thank you, Adele. And Rishabh?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Rishabh Jain. I'm 17 years old and I'm from Portland, Oregon. And for the last 4 years, I've been working on inventions in the areas of biomedical engineering and artificial intelligence. And I'm super excited to be talking about my journey to becoming a teen inventor today.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Daisha?
Hey everyone, I'm Deja Taylor. I'm a 19-year-old inventor, and I too am excited to share my rather unconventional journey to finding STEM innovation and making that a career, and turns out it's a huge passion of mine. So I'm excited to share my story with you.
Wonderful. Thank you. And now, Adele, can you tell me a bit about your invention? Or about your invention journey?
So the first invention that I created was called Smart Mobile Labs, or SML. It's a low-cost microscope and diagnostic tool that can detect blood parasites like malaria. And my goal was to bring healthcare to impoverished regions of the world. It comprises of two components. There's a hardware component, which is a smartphone with a phone attachment, and it can do 1,000 times magnification. It's achieved through a 0.5 mm glass speed and phone lens magnification. There's also a light source, and it relies on two polarized sheets to control light intensity and reduce diffusion of light, which just makes the image sharper. And then for the software, it relies on image recognition to perform a diagnosis of blood parasites. It's evolved to become the Smart Leukemia Labs, so it's able to diagnose acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And I did that through just adding semantic segmentation, object detection, and image recognition. And I filed and obtained a patent for this invention through my sophomore and junior year of high school.
Wow. And what year are you now, did you say?
Oh, I'm a senior.
Wow, super impressive. And Daisha, can you tell us about your invention and your journey?
Absolutely. So I started my journey as a junior in high school. I was not on the STEM path at all. I was actually in government policy and a lot of equity work through K through 12 education. And I was taking chemistry honors just because I could. And my chemistry teacher asked if any of us within the room wanted to join science fair. She was the correspondent for our school, and she was the mentor. And I was curious, so I raised my hand and I did science fair. And so within that, I created color changing stitches that detect infection. And the goal with that was to essentially just revolutionize wound care throughout the world, which was brought on by my equity background. So I learned that people in low and middle income countries were experiencing infection rates, and specifically surgical site infection rates, higher than any developing nation, even though it's a problem in both. And so I set out to create this solution, and within that, I found my passion, and so I've been working on it ever since. And I'm now a sophomore. I'll be a sophomore in 2 weeks at the University of Iowa, studying the same thing.
Nice. That is awesome. And I love the fact that you say, okay, I was in a totally different path and I was curious. I love that. And Rashab, I know I was listening to a TED Talk by you recently, and you talked about curiosity, and you had this wonderful quote by Albert Einstein about curiosity. And can you share some with us about your own curiosity and your work?
Yeah, definitely. So on that quote by Albert Einstein, it was actually something along the lines of Albert Einstein saying that he's neither like very intelligent or gifted in any way. He just finds himself to be very, very curious. And that's kind of how he attributes a lot of his work in that area of being curious. And that's something that I kind of very deeply resonated with. So my curiosity led me to creating a couple inventions in the areas of biomedical engineering and artificial intelligence. So my first invention was actually back in 2018. So I was about 13 years old, and I worked on an invention for pancreatic cancer to improve pancreatic cancer treatment during image-guided radiotherapy by harnessing artificial intelligence to help us focus on specific regions of the pancreas to deliver more effective radiation therapy. So after I worked on that invention, I competed in a science competition that won me the title of America's Top Young Scientist. And this title kind of brought me into a bit of a spotlight. And I at that time is kind of where I began to think of this idea of curiosity. And eventually, more recently, I've been working on more innovations in biomedical engineering and computational biology. Earlier in May of this year, I competed in the International Science and Engineering Fair, which is this huge science competition for pre-college students. So in my research project, I came up with a tool that can help us design more effective genes to save time and reduce the costs of drugs, vaccines, and pharmaceuticals. And in this biotech area, there's this really fascinating technology called recombinant expression. And this kind of goes back to this idea of curiosity because that's kind of fueled a lot of the inspiration for many of my ideas. There's some things that I find that are really interesting, and I have a lot of curiosity for them, so I want to work on them more. And what I did is I used my knowledge in artificial intelligence programming to develop a deep learning model that can learn patterns on thousands of genes within a bacterium. And using these patterns, it's able to take a different gene from a different organism, let's say something like human insulin or maybe a spike protein from the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and then optimize it based on what it learned from E. coli genes for more expression. So my invention's able to produce over 236% more protein for the same amount of time, cost, and input plasmid. So I hope that my work on these various projects can kind of have an impact on real patients' lives and hopefully help save a lot of lives.
Wow. Very, very impressive and very inspiring. And the Regeneron Science Fair, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you all three of you have participated in that competition in some manner. And the USPTO definitely has a fondness for that program. We have an employee group here, the Patent and Trademark Office Society, that provides a special act award or a special category award for those inventions that are considered to possibly be patentable. And I know I have seen all of your names in the past. And so it is, again, wonderful to have you here and wonderful to know that there are programs out there that encourage that curiosity that you all have shown. Now, another thing that strikes me about all of you is that in addition to being curious, each one of you are giving back in some way, or you're focused on the science and the invention aspect, but you're also looking at how you give back. So Adele, I understand that you have a nonprofit organization, or well, let me put it this way. Can you tell us about the Smart Mobile Labs?
Yeah, so the Smart Mobile Labs was actually the invention I mentioned earlier, but it's the low-cost microscope and diagnostic tool with the ability to detect malaria or other types of blood parasites. And I started creating the SML in 8th grade, and I worked through it through freshman year. And I combined it with the Smart Leukemia Labs with the ability to detect acute lymphoblastic leukemia, and I patented it. And so, yeah.
Wonderful. And I believe that, well, what was your motivation for that particular invention? And what made you decide to pursue a patent?
For the Smart Mobile Labs, I wanted to create something that could easily diagnose malaria because earlier my aunt had actually contracted malaria. She lives in Singapore, which is a very humid climate, and that's where mosquitoes often breed and live. So she contracted malaria, and I wanted to figure out a solution where people could easily and accurately diagnose malaria. And then the reason why I wanted to get it patented was because I wanted to collaborate with different organizations to get it proliferated. But I wanted to first protect my work because I had worked so hard on it. So I decided to get a patent.
Thank you. Thank you. And Daisha, I believe that you also have a patent journey. Can you tell us what made you decide to pursue that path?
Absolutely. So let's start off with the fact that I didn't know about the patent journey before I got into this. So I went through the whole science fair process. I did ISEF, but the International Science and Engineering Fair, but I did it during the COVID year, so I didn't have to have like any of the fun that the regular years had. But I was able to fully participate in the Regeneron Science Talent Search. So through that, like I was just going through the motions of presenting my work, and a lot of people found interest in it and had hope from what I was doing. So there were a lot of like media outlets reaching out to me. And so I went through with it because I thought the more people that knew about the work that I was doing, the better, the more people that can rally around a cause it's going to push it forward. And that was all great. Like it worked out, but there was also this protection aspect of, this is my work. I did it. I did it, and it's this whole thing. It's its own entity, and I want that to be protected because number one, I didn't see a lot of people who looked like me within the STEM innovation field, and that's something that really bugged me and kind of drew me toward this field as well, like that passion, that fuel to my fire. And so I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it the right way. And so I went through the patent journey. It's still pending, by the way, to my USPTO people on the call. But I went through the whole thing and I sought out counsel and learned just more and more about the patent journey as I started to go through it. Like there's not enough reading that you can do about the patent journey that can actually prepare you for it. You just have to jump in and then learn from the people that you've entrusted with getting this task done. And that's what I did. There were some bumps in road. There was bumps and bruises and lots of obstacles with this road. But I think in general, it's just been so amazing to learn something new. And within the innovation process, you're always learning something new. And I think that the patent process is probably one of the largest things that I've learned throughout this entire story that I have. So, yeah.
Thank you. And Risha, my understanding is that you decided not to apply for a patent. Can you tell us about some of your thoughts or rationale with regard to that decision?
Yeah, so kind of as I mentioned earlier, my invention utilizes artificial intelligence, and it's one of the first inventions in this area that's actually able to use a specific AI technology. And this by using an AI application to this problem, it's definitely a big step forward, and there's a lot of innovation that's happened in this process. So my goal ultimately was to speed up innovation as much as possible in this area. And one of the ways I could do this was by making my gene optimization tool called iCore available online, open source for testing. And this way, other companies, other researchers, they can actually test my tool in the lab and sort of validate the work and show that these sort of artificial intelligence techniques do indeed work and that they are applicable in the field. So in order to have more companies use my tool and test it, I wanted to be able to have the entire scientific community kind of have access to this tool. And ultimately, the way that I thought was kind of best for doing that was to rather explore a publication of my work to make the methods for how the tool was developed widely accessible so that others can improve upon this work and also validate it and test it in the future.
Thank you. That is wonderful. I mean, I definitely admire and respect your strategy there. I wanted to ask you, could you tell us more about precision medicine? Because I remember when I was listening to your TED Talk, you talked about precision medicine, and that just really fascinated me, that whole idea of a very individualized approach to problems.
Of course. So precision medicine is actually something that I think I've taken into account in nearly all of my work. And it's this idea of treating patients specifically based on their characteristics. So nowadays, I've seen this even ads on TV where we can go and get our genes tested and kind of get an understanding of our genetic makeup in order to make better decisions about our health and better decisions about our care. So precision medicine is taking this approach and applying it to medicine, where we can actually kind of understand a patient individually, as you mentioned, and that can be done by testing their genetic makeup, by, let's say, looking at a specific patient's cancer and seeing how big is this patient's cancer specifically, and where is it located specifically? And based on all of these characteristics, develop an individualized plan for every patient. So essentially, in the traditional approach to medicine, where you have like a one drug fits all approach, where you give every patient the same treatment. Oftentimes, this doesn't work for the vast majority of patients. So by employing a precision approach where you can actually treat each patient individually based on their characteristics, there are higher survival rates, higher quality of lives for these patients, and ultimately, we're providing better care. So it's something that I've always tried to focus on, whether it was my innovations specifically targeting each patient's pancreas more effectively through artificial intelligence, or this invention with iCore, where we're actually able to develop larger quantities of drugs in the same amount of time. And oftentimes, these are the drugs that offer specific treatments for patients.
Thank you. I really like that idea of the individualized approach, whether it's in medicine or education or learning. It's just so important that we recognize and celebrate differences and think about how what we each bring to the table is something unique and interesting. And it's a different perspective and a different mindset and an opportunity to solve problems. And I'm so impressed again with all of you and how you're individually working to solve problems in your own way and with different audiences. So Adele, tell us about your work with research around the vaping culture. I know that you have done some work in this area, and I'd love to hear more about your motivation and love for you to tell us about what you've been doing there.
Yeah, so when I was a freshman in high school, I was shocked by the vaping culture. Like the hallways and the stairwells and the bathrooms would all be like foggy, and we even had to get a drug dog. It was a really big issue. And one of my friends even started vaping, and I asked her why. And despite all the evidence that our teacher showed us, she thought that the teacher was trying to scare us. So I thought the only way I could convince her to stop vaping was if I did a science experiment and showed her the hard data. So what I did was I studied the degree of withdrawal behavior that planarians exhibit at various concentrations and flavors of nicotine. And after I had done this for about a month, I presented the data to my school and my peers and my science fair, or the regional science fair. And I managed to convince my friend to stop vaping. So that's why I started the research.
Thank you. And Daisha, I remember in an interview that I heard with you on, I believe it was on NewsHour, you were talking about your work around equity, but also just recognizing that not everyone has the same access to technology, and you wanted to do something about that. Can you tell us a little bit more about just what you hope to do through your invention or through your work?
So there are a couple things that I want to do through my work. So to your first point about what I mentioned in NewsHour, so that was essentially the foundation of why I started my research. As I mentioned earlier, like there was this whole equity issue. And again, people didn't have access to technology because the original solution that I found was that people created these stitches that had like some really fancy technology. And so they connected to smartphones and whatnot to monitor wound healing, which was really cool. But because I knew about the infection rates in low and middle income countries, I was like, how many people in low and middle income countries are going to prioritize having a smartphone? And within that, within healthcare systems in those countries, how many of the citizens who actually need those stitches are going to be able to afford them? So there were those two issues, and I set out to solve them by essentially simplifying the solution. So I used solvochromic indicators to apply to this suture material, and that in and of itself is able to detect infection. So that solved that issue. And so going into all of the like product development phase and everything has been very interesting. But through my work in general, I did have this equity background, which allowed me to do all of the things that I mentioned before. But now that I'm in a position where I can say I've done research, I've been in this community of like STEM researchers and innovators, I am able to go back and talk to students and educators in my little equity sphere about innovation. I just did a keynote on Monday about education and its correlation to innovation. So like that's the type of thing that I do with the work that I've already accomplished, but I'm nowhere near what I set out to accomplish essentially. So those I would say those are the definite two things that I have done thus far with the work that I've accomplished and how I use that to go back and inspire the other communities that I touched.
Wonderful. And I hope the presentation that you did was recorded on Monday, because I would love to hear that. So
I'll check on that for you. I'll check on it.
Okay, I appreciate that. And Rishabh, I am really excited about the work that you're doing with your nonprofit. Could you tell us more about that and what you hope to achieve with that work?
Of course, yeah. So kind of the idea for the nonprofit organization that I started goes back to when I was really young. And, when I was maybe 4 or 5 years old, a lot of my fondest memories came from playing around on the computer or doing science experiments. And so I was really fortunate to be able to get exposed to the STEM fields at a young age. And growing up, I got to see one of my personal inspirations, my older brother, build his first computer game. And so, I always wanted to do all the cool things that he was doing. And I think ultimately that's what led me to start inventing and to get interested in learning programming and eventually my first AI models. So, when I was 14 or 15, getting that platform back at TEDx, when I shared that Albert Einstein quote, one of the things that I mentioned was that, anyone can be an Einstein if they have that curiosity in STEM. And I realized that I had the potential to inspire other youth to get involved in science as well through my platform. And of course, as we were kind of talking about earlier, everyone has their own interests. Not everyone will have a passion for STEM. But I know for a fact that there are many kids out there who would if they had that spark and were able to get started. So my brother and I, we started a nonprofit organization called the Samyak Science Society. And I kind of believe in the power of curiosity and something called experimental learning, where kids can get hands-on projects and fun experiences, kind of just like I did when I was 10 years old on my mom's computer coding a painting app. And so we've been able to conduct many in-person workshop experiences where we've really been able to connect with students, and then also large virtual workshops, kind of when COVID started, with hundreds of kids tuning in all around the world. And so to the audience here today, I kind of raised the thing that, I highly encourage everyone to advocate for STEM opportunities for children and kids everywhere, and help us in our organization create that spark for as many people as we can.
Thank you. I love that, and we are kindred spirits in the Office of Education at USPTO. We definitely, and throughout the agency, definitely believe in experiential learning and opportunities to provide more students with opportunities and access and exposure or interest to different areas, because there's so much out there. And as you said, finding your passion, finding the thing that you're curious about, the thing that really gets you going, is just so important. And so I want to ask each one of you, what inspires you? What piqued your curiosity, if you will? And I know you've talked about, just being curious and the influence of an older brother and having that opportunity to learn to code or experiment at an early age. And so, Adele, what I'm going to ask you, what inspires you? What motivates you and got you interested in your area?
I think the thing that motivates me the most is just like the people around me and like the stories that happen, and my inability to not do anything about it. Like, for instance, when my aunt got malaria or my friend started vaping, I knew that I could do something about it if I utilized the knowledge that I have and I applied it to science. So I did a lot of YouTube and Google, learned how to code from there, and created my inventions. And I just hope to help people easily diagnose their conditions. And I'm trying to spread healthcare to the impoverished regions of the world.
Wonderful. I greatly admire the fact that you know and believe that you have the ability to make a difference and to make a change. Daisha, what inspires you? What motivates you?
Ooh, so I would say there are a lot of things, but I would say, like, really my curiosity for innovation and just all of that stems from my mom. Growing up, and even today, she always said, like, you can do anything you put your mind to. Like, that was always the phrase. You can do anything you put your mind to. And I feel like it started because I had this obsession with the movie Akeelah and the Bee. And it was just a fantastic movie. Audience, you should watch it. But yeah, she always said, you can do anything you put your mind to. And with that, I'm like, I sure can. If I want to do STEM, I'm going to do STEM. And if I want to create color changing stitches, that's what I'm going to do. Like, so I think that phrase in and of itself is so powerful because it instills something very powerful within you. Like, you really can do what you put your mind to, like, simple. And since it comes from my mom, it just holds a very special place in my heart. And that's what I want to leave everyone here with. If you didn't listen to anything I said, especially the students on the call, you can do anything you put your mind to. Simple.
I love that. I love that. And I really, really am fond of the movie Aquila and the Bee as well. Yes, snaps. And I love the advice from your mom. I think of something my dad used to always tell me, and that's all that you are and all that you will ever be is left up to one person, and that person is you. And
Yes, ma'am.
yeah, it just carries you through. So, thankfully, you had someone to plant that seed in you, and we each had someone to plant that seed in us. How can we plant that seed in other people or students who maybe don't have someone that's telling them you can do this if you put your mind to it, or they don't have the example of Adele or Daisha or Rashab? What do we need to do? You all are amazing. What do we need to do to light that spark? And I know you've talked about some things that you're doing, but I'd love for you to just tell us more and share with our audience what you think we need to do. How can we help inspire and create more innovators and just empower more people?
I'll start.
Okay.
Just because I think my path's probably the most unconventional. So I've lived in like 3 different places at this point in my life, just 3, like simple, all in the Midwest. But within those 3 locations, life was just vastly different. So I lived in Chicago, Illinois, that's where I'm from. And we moved to a small town in Madison, Indiana, which is different. And then we moved to essentially Iowa City area. And I think the best thing that we can do to create just better human beings, not even just innovators, but like just human beings, period, is to introduce them to new worlds. Introduce them to things all across the board. Just get out of your comfort zone, get out of your own community type thing, and go learn about someone else's. Whether that's like a physical, like moving locations, right? Or just like visiting for periods of time, right? Because that teaches us so much about ways of life in other areas. And within that, right, also like being grateful for what you have and all of that. But just the introduction to other people who may not look like you, who may not think like you, is just so important. And I think that has played a huge role in forming who I am today and my ability to innovate. And within that, just introducing to new activities. My entire life, like we've done everything under the sun. I mean, we've done paddle boating recently. That's like new. We don't do water sports. So like weekends at like the Museum of Science and Industry, and like everything in between, the museums of all sort. And within that, I was introduced to something new every single time. And you just never know what, as Rashib said, like what's going to light that spark, what's going to ignite that spark within you. I didn't know raising my hand was in a science class was going to get me on this panel today, but here I am. So just introduce yourself to new things, whether that's something that I'm calling on parents when I say that, really, to like, get your kid out there, do new things, right? But if people don't have that example, that's totally fine. There's Google, right? We can introduce ourselves to things all across the world now, just with the touch of a button. So that would be my one thing to urge everyone to do, is to get out there and just learn something new.
Wonderful advice. Thank you. Adele.
I think adding on to Deja with the wanting to branch out, because I don't think I would have ever done like coding or robotics if I hadn't joined. In 10th grade, I joined the first Lego League, I think it's called. Where I was like introduced to coding and robotics. And it was from that point onwards that I decided that like I was interested in coding, I was interested in computer science, and that led me to starting all these innovations. And it's also just taking advantage of what is given. Like, for example, Google and YouTube, like they're so widespread, and that's how I learned how to code and create all these innovations. Like, I remember just like sitting down and like learning how to code is like a 101 lesson. Like, I don't think I would have ever gotten this far if it wasn't for the widespread opportunities such as Google and YouTube. So just make sure that you are taking the opportunities that are given to you.
Wonderful. And Risha.
Yeah, of course. So I think I kind of touched on this briefly earlier with my nonprofit organization, because that's really one of our main goals, and that's the vision that we have, that anyone anywhere should have this opportunity and should be able to get involved in STEM if possible. And so I think, to add on to that, one of the biggest things that I've noticed is the interest in sort of tinkering and experimenting for young children. So I feel like introducing kids to that mindset of being able to tinker and not being afraid of failure is really important to their learning, and ultimately that learning is what drives innovation and inventions. So I feel like I know it's a little bit cliche, but oftentimes when people say that failure is key to learning, I think that is truly true. In order to experience those failures, one of the best ways to do that is to really get your hands dirty and to start tinkering. So for parents, for educators, and for any kids themselves who are listening in today, I feel like that's really important to encourage and inspire, is this mindset, a tinkering mindset, to identify problems and to try to address them, or just simple project ideas, and to get started, really.
Yeah, I like that. Again, wonderful advice. And I know, Adele, you mentioned FIRST Robotics as one way that students can get engaged. Certainly YouTube and Google, as you said, we all are learning so much in vastly different ways than we did when I grew up. Which is wonderful. The Congressional App Challenge is another program that's out there that encourages students to explore coding and computer science, and to think about ways to solve problems, because all of you are problem solvers. And I know that there are other things out there like Invention Education that provides opportunities for students, and science fairs, of course. The tinkering, you mentioned the making and tinkering as another way that students can get engaged. And Daisha, I just love that you pointed out that, try new things, don't be afraid to do something different. And just thinking about diversity of thought, diversity of people, diversity of thought, diversity of activities, because we all can learn from each other. So I have another question where we want to learn from you. So USPTO is a federal agency. We're part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. We have a focus. We're known as America's Innovation Agency. I want you to tell us, what do you think that federal agencies, what can USPTO do to help encourage and inspire more educators and learners to become problem solvers, whether it's in a STEM field or whether it's just recognizing that I have the ability to make change? What can we as federal agencies do? Or what do you think we should do? And I can start with whichever person decides they want to go first.
I guess I can get started on that. So of course, I think one of the things that I'd like to really drive home is, again, this idea of providing students with the opportunities to really get exposed to STEM in the first place. So organizing and offering workshops and classes for free for any student, regardless of their background, is really important in order to provide that opportunity in the first place. But then I think something that really caught my attention that you mentioned was getting students to realize that they have the ability to invent and innovate as well. And I think the best way to do that is really to show examples of other students who have done that, and other students who have gone out and innovated. So showing those examples to students and hosting more events, maybe like this, to get students exposed to not only to hear from other students who have been able to succeed in these areas, but then also give them direct an action plan, like opportunities and workshops they can get started with. So this combination of first getting their interest and getting their excitement by seeing kids or people who look just like them, who are already doing this, and then giving them a potential plan for getting started and getting involved through workshops and through learning opportunities.
Thank you very much.
I'll
Daisha?
build off of it. 'Cause that was very well said. But to add on, I would love to see like a collaboration between the Department of Education and the USPTO, like boots on the ground, like actually collaborating with school districts to help them put innovation, aspects of innovation and protection into the curriculum. I think that would be really cool, because I had to start from scratch when I learned about the patent process. And I feel like if we are pushing, if we're pushing our students to innovate more and to become more innovative, right? We need to also teach them the protection aspects of that, right? We can't just leave them high and dry and say, okay, you've innovated something, now you have to figure the rest out. I think that going the step further and actually saying, hey, after you've made something, here's what you can do to protect that, and then go about your life. Like if you made it and you want to protect it, cool, and not do anything else with it, fine, right? But just going that step further and teaching about the patent process in more depth with students in all grades, I think would be really cool. Also, to build off Rashid's a little bit, I think that it's really cool to have those like workshops and everything, but there are a lot of young innovators that are actually already going to various places and teaching students. I know I do it all the time in my community. I just spoke to educators on Monday, and like when the school year starts up, I'll be speaking to kindergartners and whatnot, like all of these different things. I think it would be really cool to see the USPTO throw support behind the young innovators who are actually doing that work consciously and currently, as opposed to just kind of saying, "Hey, you exist, yay!" Like having collaboration with our young innovators as well, who are already doing the work, would be awesome. So, yeah, those would be my two.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And Adele?
I think definitely having events and a support system like the USPTO is a great way to get people to start innovating. Because one thing I've noticed with my club, G-Star, for example, is that when we hosted a club in the summer to encourage female participation in STEAM, we saw an increase in the number of female students entering both the robotics and the gifted and talented programs. And I think that just first introducing and then having the support system and encouraging and just showing that, yes, you can do it. I think that's a great way to start off and further increase the number of participation in innovating in STEM.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I am so encouraged and inspired. And I would be remiss if I did not point out that our leadership at the USPTO, our director, Kathy Vidal, and our deputy director, Derek Brent, really have the same mindset that you all have about getting out and providing that support and utilizing examples and stories of people a variety of people, so that everyone knows, as Rashid said, that this is something that's in all of us. It's not just in one or two of us. It's in all of us. It's in all of us in different forms. It's very individualized. And finding ways to help people identify and tap into that power is really exciting. And we're very excited to have all of you, and also to have leadership that really has a focus on innovation. The USPTO, along with the Department of Commerce, have launched an initiative. An initiative is called the Council for Inclusive Innovation, or CI Square. And the Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo, is the chair of this council, and it consists of people from academia and nonprofit organizations and universities and industry, and people trying to think together and work together, because we know that there are lots of different solutions out there, and we're all trying to figure out how we can help expand the innovation ecosystem. And I think there's not a better way to do it than to hear from all of you and to apply what you said should be done, telling those stories, having examples that are peers and that are near peers, focusing on things that people have in common, also focusing on things that people have that are different is another way as well. Let me ask you, I know, Daisha, you talked about the Department of Education, and I'd like to talk a little bit about educators. And I'd love to hear from you what you'd like to see educators doing, or how you think educators can help encourage a culture of innovation in classrooms or outside of classrooms.
Yeah, I love that question. So on Monday, I walked about 100 educators and building leaders through this exercise that's supposed to like unlock your inner innovator. Okay, I think a big problem is that we just don't know how to innovate, and that's due to a bunch of limitations put on us, and like maybe we can't, we'll just go with the motions, right? But when we allow our students to dream without limitation, then we just get a whole new generation. I think that's so cool. So I walked these educators through this this exercise, and I told them, hey, the way you can become a better educator and allow your students space to innovate is by, number one, allowing yourself to innovate, and then prior to the school year, identifying your creative deficit. I think, and that's just huge to me, because a lot of times we go through life and we're like, okay, like maybe we're bad at this, and that's just that. We don't look for someone to kind of make up for it in a way, or we just like, hey, I don't have it and I'm not going to work on it. I'm going to go throughout life. But as an educator, I just don't think we can really do that. We have to identify what we lack in and find ways to fix it or ways to make up for it. And in this case, within a classroom, especially like K through 6 in some areas where that's all elementary, like you're with these students for 8 hours a day. And so having them in the classroom, being able to like innovate and just create better lesson plans for them to learn is huge. And so I think that first starts with identifying our like educators' creative deficit. There's nothing wrong with that. There's just not a better way to put it. And so with that, you're allowing yourself space to create better holistic lesson plans that also reflect in the results of your students. And then within that result, your students are able to have space to do experimental learning and design thinking and all of these different things. So that would be my advice for educators.
I love it. Adele, what would be your advice, or what is your advice?
I think adding on to Deja, perhaps like switching from, because what I've noticed in the classroom is that when teachers give students projects and you're able to add a creative flair to it, students often like learn better, and we're also able to just do what like innovate more, I guess. For example, like physics, instead of just having us do like worksheets in the classroom and just doing like standardized homework and tests, the teachers have switched to like a more project-based class where we're able to like innovate and come up with experiments and just designs that students are able to test physics topics with. And I think that that form of classroom not only helps students be more engaged with the lesson plans, but also just be more innovative in general. So I think moving away from possibly like worksheets and like papers to making more of like a project-based learning curriculum would be a great start.
Thank you. And Rishab?
Yeah, so I was actually thinking about my time in elementary school. So this might be a little bit fuzzy because it was many years ago, but I remember back in elementary school, maybe 4th or 5th grade, we would have our days kind of split up by subject. So in the morning, we would do like, let's say science, then afternoon, it would be math, and later in the afternoon, reading, writing, and so on. So it was completely split up. And so earlier this summer, when I was conducting some STEAM workshops, that's science, tech, engineering, art, and math, one thing that I kind of learned for education and I guess learning as a whole is the effectiveness of kind of an interdisciplinary style of teaching. So combining different aspects with each other so that every student finds things interesting. So I remember there was one activity that students liked, far more than anything else. And that was actually an interdisciplinary activity because it combined both coding, so like technology, with art. And so kids found that really interesting because some of them had an interest in drawing and painting, but they were also able to learn coding skills through that. And then others were already interested in coding, and they were able to get exposed to actual art skills. So I think that's something that could be really effective for teaching is actually instead of splitting things up subject by subject is incorporating them all into one potentially. And that would not only offer students from a diverse set of interests to get exposed to different things and potentially find new passions in different areas, but also just really help them learn more effectively, help them grasp more information and learn more in a faster time.
Can I add on, actually?
Yes. This is wonderful.
Yes. So I would also like to add in, ask your students how they want to learn. I distinctly remember, one of the first times my teacher had asked me, and I personally think she had identified where she was lacking in teaching aspects, right? Because she was like, hey guys, I've been teaching this specific lesson. This was Spanish class. I was teaching this lesson for 20 years or something like that, like this. And I really want to kind of switch things up. Do you guys have any programs that you guys like to use in other classes that maybe we could incorporate into the Spanish class? And we were like, of course. We had just I was taking AP psychology at the time. So I was like, oh, there's this really cool website my AP psych teacher uses. Maybe it could translate well into a Spanish format. And it did. And so we used it for the rest of the year. So asking your students how they want to absorb information is so interesting because you'll get different answers from different students. This isn't like you go through every single lesson plan and you're like, okay, we have one of two ways, but when you see fit, just asking your students how they want to learn. And then adding to Adele, I really think that was really cool because I was always that student that wanted to do a trifold poster for whatever project-based thing we did. I have a closet full of them. And I think that's just so beneficial because the hands-on, as Rashib said, tinkering with materials, you just absorb the information just so well. And I think project-based learning is just across the board better than anything else.
Nice. And I love, again, all of the ideas. I love the idea of this interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary or convergence, if you will, of all these different areas coming together and people finding their interest and finding their passions. And I see Jenny here on the screen, so that lets me know that we have to bring this discussion to a close. But I just want to say that thank you so much for being here and for all of these wonderful thoughts and ideas, and we will take them to heart in terms of how we think about reaching out to educators and learners and ways to engage. So again, thank you so much.